Assessing the Paris Agreement. Is it working for the Bahamas and the Caribbean?
Hello, everyone. When Hurricane Dorian devastated the Bahamas in 2019, it exposed a difficult reality. Countries that contribute the least to climate change often suffer some of its most severe consequences. This raises an important question. Are international climate agreements like the Paris Agreement truly equipped to meet the needs of vulnerable Caribbean nations? Today, I will assess the Paris Agreement, discuss its global significance, examine the Bahamas' commitments under the treaty, identify challenges to implementation, and offer recommendations for strengthening climate action across the Caribbean. The Paris Agreement was adopted in 2015 at the 21st United Nations Climate Change Conference, commonly known as COP21. It was negotiated under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and entered into force in 2016. The agreement's primary objective is to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial levels, while pursuing efforts to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It also seeks to strengthen countries' abilities to adapt to climate change and mobilize financial resources to support climate action. The Paris Agreement is significant because it represents the first truly global climate accord, with nearly every country in the world committing to taking action through nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. Unlike previous agreements, it recognizes that countries face different circumstances and allows them to determine their own pathways toward achieving climate goals. For the Bahamas, the importance of the Paris Agreement cannot be overstated. As a small island developing state, the Bahamas faces rising sea levels, increasingly intense hurricanes, coastal erosion, coral reef degradation, and threats to freshwater resources. These environmental impacts also create economic and social challenges by affecting tourism, fisheries, infrastructure, public health, and national development. Climate change is therefore not simply an environmental issue. For the Bahamas, it is also a development issue, an economic issue, and a human well-being issue. Under the Paris Agreement, the Bahamas has committed to increasing the use of renewable energy, improving energy efficiency, strengthening climate adaptation measures, enhancing disaster preparedness, protecting coastal and marine ecosystems, and building greater resilience to climate-related impacts. These commitments reflect an important reality for Caribbean countries. While reducing emissions remains important, adaptation is equally critical because many of the effects of climate change are already being experienced today. However, despite these commitments, implementation remains a significant challenge. A common assumption is that implementation gaps are caused primarily by a lack of political will. While governance challenges certainly exist, this explanation overlooks the structural realities faced by many Caribbean countries. Small island states often face high debt burdens, limited technical capacity, and significant dependence on external financing. Climate projects frequently rely on international funding mechanisms that can be complex, competitive, and slow to access. As a result, governments may have ambitious climate commitments but struggle to secure the resources needed to implement them effectively. There can also be a disconnect between international climate negotiations and the realities faced by local communities that experience climate impacts firsthand. To strengthen the execution of the Paris Agreement across the Caribbean, I would recommend 3 key actions. First, climate action should be mainstreamed across all sectors of government, rather than treated solely as an environmental issue. Climate considerations should be integrated into public health, tourism, infrastructure, education, housing, and economic planning. This would create a more coordinated and resilient approach to development. Second, Caribbean countries should deepen regional cooperation through organizations such as CARICOM, Caribbean Community Regional Organization, by sharing technical expertise, climate data, research capacity, and adaptation strategies. Countries can overcome resource limitations and strengthen collective resilience. Third, youth participation should be institutionalized within climate governance processes. Young people should not only be consulted but actively involved in policy design, implementation, and monitoring. As the generation that will live longest with the consequences of climate change, their perspective and leadership are essential. In conclusion, the Paris Agreement remains one of the most important international environmental agreements ever adopted. It provides a critical framework for global climate action and offers important opportunities for countries like the Bahamas. However, the success of the agreement in the Caribbean will not be measured by signatures on a treaty. It will be measured by whether governments, regional institutions, and international partners can translate commitments into meaningful action that protects people, livelihoods, and ecosystems. For the Bahamas and the wider Caribbean, climate resilience is not simply an environmental objective. It is a prerequisite for sustainable development, economic stability, public health, and our collective future.
Thank you for listening to my presentation on assessing the Paris Agreement. Is it working for the Bahamas and the Caribbean?